My sister spent 8 months telling my 14-year-old daughter that I was a fake doctor. Not incompetent. Not average. Fake. That surgery was something anyone could learn. That doctors were just mechanics who liked to seem important. That I specifically was someone Lily should not model her life after. 8 months. For separate conversations. My 14-year-old daughter. Then one Saturday morning at 6:47, my phone rang. Multi-vehicle accident on I-40. 3 incoming. Did I want the most critical? I said yes. I always said yes. I was in the OR by 7:15. Blunt abdominal trauma, BP dropping, the kind of case where everything outside the room stops existing and the only thing left is the work. 4 hours and 11 minutes. I closed. I walked to the scrub sink. I pulled off my gloves. The charge nurse came to find me. She said, "Dr. Calloway, your patient's emergency contact is listed as a sister. Her name is Dr. Calloway." I stood at that sink with cold water running over my hands and I understood, before she said another word, exactly who was in that recovery room. My sister. The one who had been dismantling my daughter's confidence in me for 8 months. She had just spent 4 hours and 11 minutes on my operating table. And she was alive because of me. Welcome back to BetrayalLedger Stories, where family secrets never stay buried for long. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and join the family, because this story is one of the wildest ones we've ever told. Let's get into it. My name is Dr. Rachel Calloway. I am 38 years old. And the morning I saved my sister's life, she had spent 8 months trying to convince my daughter that I did not deserve the title that was standing between her and the table she was lying on. Stay with me, because this story goes much deeper than one morning in an OR. It goes back years. And it ends in a recovery room with my hand over my sister's and 2 words I had needed to hear for longer than I had been willing to admit. But first you need to understand what she did. And why. And what it cost both of us before that Saturday morning changed everything. I need you to understand what my sister and I were before I tell you what we became. Because we were not always this. That is the thing about family stories that gets lost when you tell only the end of them. You tell the betrayal and you do not tell the years before it when the betrayal was not yet a fact, but only a tendency, a pattern that you could see if you were paying close enough attention, but that you were not. Because the person exhibiting the tendency was your sister, and you had loved her since before you had language for loving anyone. My sister's name is Diane. She is 4 years older than me, 42 years old on the morning of the accident, which was how old I knew before the charge nurse told me because I had known my sister's age her entire life. We had grown up in a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, the daughters of an electrician and a school librarian who had raised us in a 3-bedroom ranch house on Cypress Street with a fig tree in the backyard that my grandmother had planted in 1971 and that still produced figs every summer in the specific patient way of trees that have been there long enough to stop caring whether anyone is paying attention. I had wanted to be a doctor since I was 7. Diane had wanted to be an actress since she was 9. I had pursued medicine with the methodical, decade-long commitment that the pursuit required. Diane had pursued acting with the passionate, intermittent energy of someone who loved the idea of a thing more than the sustained practice of it. Moving from community theater to regional productions to 2 years in Los Angeles at 25 that produced nothing she could point to except the specific, expensive education of a dream that encounters its own limits. She came back to Memphis at 27 and had been there since, working in events management, a job that used her natural warmth and her comfort in front of people in a way that suited her even if it was not what she had imagined for herself. I was not the problem between us. I want to say that clearly because it matters. The problem between us was not that I had succeeded at what I attempted and she had redirected from what she had attempted. I had never once, in the history of our relationship, made Diane feel less than. I had never thrown my career at her. I had never qualified my support for her with my own achievements. I had been her sister in the complete sense, the way our mother had raised us to be sisters, which meant present and specific and without keeping score. The problem between us was my daughter. Lily was 14 and she was brilliant in the way that some 14-year-olds are brilliant, the way that produces both pride and a kind of helpless wonder in the people around them. A brightness that you did not manufacture and cannot take credit for and can only try not to obscure. She loved science the way I had loved it at her age, with the focused, consuming attention of someone who has found the thing their brain is designed for and is not yet old enough to have learned to be self-conscious about loving it that much. She talked about medical school the way I had talked about it when I was her age, as a fact rather than an aspiration, something she was moving toward rather than wondering about. Diane had no children. She had been in a relationship with a man named Brian for 6 years, and they had discussed it and concluded, she had told me, that it was not the path for them. And I had accepted that conclusion as her own, and had not made it mean anything about our relationship. But I had watched, over the years, the specific way Diane interacted with Lily, and what I had seen was more complicated than an aunt who loved her niece. It was an aunt who loved her niece, and who also found Lily's trajectory, the science, the medical school talk, the particular way she looked when she was thinking about something that interested her, something that landed differently in Diane than simple affection. I had filed it. I had not acted on what I had filed. I had adjusted my attention, and I had kept watching. 8 months before the accident, Lily called me from her room on a Wednesday evening. I was still at the hospital, finishing a chart, the kind of call I always picked up immediately when it came from her because she was 14, and at 14 the calls that come in the evening from children who usually text are the calls that matter. She said, "Mom, is what you do actually hard?" I asked her what she meant. She said Aunt Diane had told her that lots of people became doctors. She said Diane had told her that medical school was not as difficult as people made it sound, and that the reason people thought it was hard was because doctors liked to seem important. She said Diane had told her that what I did specifically, surgery, was mostly just following a procedure that anyone could learn if they wanted to. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage, and I listened to my daughter tell me what her aunt had said, and I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the November temperature. I did not call Diane that evening. I did not call her the next day. I sat with what Lily had told me for a week, adding it to the folder I had been building for years. And I thought about what I was going to do and what I was not going to do and what the difference between those two things meant for a relationship I had invested 38 years in. Stay with me, because it got worse before it stopped. Over the following 3 months, Lily came to me with 3 more things Diane had said. That surgeons were basically just mechanics. That the difference between a good doctor and a mediocre one was mostly marketing. That she, Lily, was probably smart enough for medical school, but should make sure she wanted it for herself and not because she was following in her mother's footsteps without thinking it through. None of these things were delivered cruelly in the way that cruelty announces itself. They were delivered in the warm, confiding tone of an aunt having honest conversations with a niece about the world, in the specific register of someone who presents themselves as the person who will tell you the truth that other people are too polite or too invested to say. That register is the most effective kind of undermining because it is almost indistinguishable from genuine care and because the person receiving it often feels grateful for the honesty before they understand what the honesty is actually doing. Lily was 14 and she was brilliant, but she was 14. The conversations had produced in her a hesitation I had not seen before, a slight withdrawal from the certainty she had always had about her direction, and watching that withdrawal happen in real time was something I will carry with me for a long time. I called Diane in February. I had decided what I was going to say, and how I was going to say it, and I had decided it from a place of clarity rather than the immediate heat of the first Wednesday evening phone call from Lily. I told Diane what Lily had told me. I described the 4 separate conversations my daughter had reported over 3 months. I said I was not going to call her a liar. I said I was going to ask her directly whether these conversations had happened the way Lily had described them. Diane said Lily was misinterpreting things. I said I was willing to believe that interpretation was possible for one conversation. I said 4 conversations over 3 months, with a consistent pattern suggested something other than misinterpretation. Diane said I was always making things about myself. I said I was making it about my 14-year-old daughter, whose confidence in her own ambitions had been visibly affected by conversations she had with her aunt. Diane said some things after that. I will not reproduce them in full because some of what was said belongs to the private record of a relationship that had been building to that conversation for longer than either of us had been fully honest about. What I will tell you is that by the end of the call I understood two things clearly. The first was that Diane had been doing what Lily had described, deliberately and with awareness of what she was doing. The second was that she was not, at that moment, willing to acknowledge it. I ended the call. I sat in my kitchen with the February cold pressing against the windows and the specific, particular silence of a house where something has just shifted permanently. And I thought about a fig tree on Cypress Street and a 3-bedroom ranch house and a sister I had loved for 38 years, and what it meant when love and clarity arrived at the same moment pointing in opposite directions. I did not speak to Diane for 5 months. Then it was a Saturday morning in July, and the charge nurse called at 6:47 and said there had been a multi-vehicle accident on I-40. I did not know it was Diane on the table. The patient was presented to me as a 42-year-old female with blunt abdominal trauma and a dropping blood pressure and the clinical information that made the case mine, and I took it the way I took every case, as the complete and total responsibility of someone whose job was to be equal to whatever the next 4 hours required. I was equal to it. I had been doing this for 11 years and I was very good at it, and I was good at it on that Saturday morning the same way I was good at it on every Saturday morning, which was without qualification, and without reservation, and without anything in the room except the work. 4 hours and 11 minutes. I closed. I stood at the scrub sink. The charge nurse told me about the emergency contact. I stood there for a long time with the water running cold. Then I dried my hands. I went to the recovery area. I sat in a chair beside the bed where my sister was coming out of anesthesia, the slow, confused return of someone who has been a long way away and is not entirely certain of the distance they have traveled. I watched her face reorganize itself into consciousness. I watched her eyes focus. I watched her find me. She said my name. I said I was here. She said what happened. I told her there had been an accident. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her she was at the hospital. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, "You operated on me." I said yes. She was quiet for a long time. The recovery room had its specific sounds, monitors, and the soft movement of nurses and the distant intercom and the particular quality of air that hospitals maintain at a temperature slightly too cool for comfort. Her hand was on the bed beside her, and I put my hand over it, not because I had decided to, but because she was my sister and she was alive and the body does things before the mind gives permission. She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "About Lily." I said, "I know that too." She said the things she said next in the specific, stripped-down language of someone who has just had 4 hours to be closer to the end of things than they expected, and who has arrived back on the other side of that with a revised understanding of what deserves to be said and what does not. She did not make it complicated. She did not explain the psychology of what she had done or offer the context she had offered in February. She said she had been jealous and she had taken it out on the wrong person, and she was sorry. I sat beside her bed in the recovery room for 2 hours. I did not tell her everything was fine because it was not entirely fine, and she would have known I was managing her if I had said so. I told her we would talk when she was out of the hospital, and that I was glad she was alive, and that those two things were both true simultaneously. She came home from the hospital on Tuesday. She was with Brian, and I called every day for a week to check her recovery, the specific, practical check-ins of a surgeon who understands what the post-operative period requires and who also happened to be the patient's sister. Lily came to visit Diane 3 weeks after the discharge. She drove with me on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in the passenger seat with her legs folded the way she sat when she was thinking about something, and she did not say much on the drive, and I did not push her. When we got to Diane's house, she sat on the couch beside her aunt, and they talked for an hour, and I sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and did not listen because some conversations belong only to the people having them. On the drive home, Lily said, "She apologized." I said, "I know." Lily said, "She said you were the best surgeon she had ever seen." I said she had not technically seen me operate. Lily looked at me with the specific, patient expression of a 14-year-old who understands that her mother is deflecting and who has decided to allow it. She said, "Mom." She knows. I looked at the road. The Memphis evening was doing what Memphis evenings do in August, the heat finally releasing its grip as the sun went down, the air going from brutal to bearable in the specific. Gradual way of a city that has been doing this for a very long time and has no intention of apologizing for the summer it puts you through to get there. I said yes. She does. We drove the rest of the way home without talking about it further. Lily had her feet on the dashboard, which I was not going to say anything about tonight. The city moved past the windows in the specific, familiar way of a place you have known long enough to have stopped seeing it and started feeling it instead. Diane and I were not the same after that. We were something that had been taken apart and reassembled, and the reassembled version was different in the way of things that have been repaired. Visible evidence of where the break was, a structure that holds because of the repair rather than in spite of it. That is not worse than what we were before. It is different. And different, in my experience, is not a word that means less than. It means changed. We had both changed. That was enough to work with.